Hello and welcome back to The Juggle is Real. I'm Andryanna and we're getting to the end of February. And as we continue exploring relationships this month, the month where love, connection, and partnership tend to take center stage, today's conversation looks at one of the relationship dynamics that quietly impacts so many marriages, so many families. Because when you build a life with someone, you're not just joining with a partner, you're stepping into a broader family system and you're navigating those relationships. Well, when you're doing that, it can be meaningful, it can be complicated, emotional, and sometimes it can be just really challenging. I'm especially excited to welcome back today's guest, Dr. Tracy Dalgleish. Tracy first joined us a couple of years ago. Oh my gosh, time has flown. We had such an impactful conversation. We were looking around resentment in relationships, those primary and secondary emotions, repair and conflict resolution. And it was tied to her book, I Didn't Sign Up for This. It was one of those episodes that listeners really connected with because it was real, it was grounded, and it was practical. So you can head back and you can listen to that. I'll put it in the notes for this podcast episode. But since then, Tracy has continued her work as a clinical psychologist, couples therapist, and relationship expert. And she is here today to talk about her new book, You, Your Husband, and His Mother. Create a healthy relationship with your mother-in-law and your spouse in 5 simple steps. So in today's conversation, we are exploring why in-law dynamics carry so much emotional weight, the patterns that create tension within family systems, how couples can align and communicate through challenges, what boundaries actually look like in practice, how shared values guide decisions, and from my perspective as a mom raising 3 boys, how we can foster healthy relationship patterns early on and how to be a good mother-in-law when that day comes. This is a thoughtful, honest, and incredibly practical conversation about protecting your partnership while navigating complex family relationships. Let's dive right in. This is the Juggle is Real podcast. I hope you feel seen, that you realize your worth, lighten your load, and prioritize your own needs. As we hear from leading experts and well-known faces in the wellness, entrepreneurship, education, and motherhood space, I hope you gain insights, proven practices, and learn actionable tools to help you enjoy the juggle of work, family, and everything in between with a little less stress and a lot more ease, joy, and fun. Most of all, I hope you find what you need to simplify, streamline, and supercharge your own journey of better balance and self-love. Are you with me? Let's get started. Tracy, Dr. Tracy, welcome back to The Juggle is Real. How are you doing?
Oh, Andryanna, so nice to see you. Thank you for having me here. Before we jumped on, we were talking about the snow. So we're just surviving the snow.
Yeah, we're inching towards the end of February, and I was doing some looking back and some reflecting, and it has been 2 years since we last had a chat on the podcast. I can't believe it. Time has flown. In our last conversation that I did re-listen to recently, it was so good. We were talking about resentment in relationships, in spousal relationships. We were talking about communication, repair. I was like listening back and being like, oh yeah, it was so good. I cannot believe it's been 2 years. How have you been? I mean, you've written a new book since then. How have things evolved for you, both personally and professionally? Your kiddies are starting to grow, and all sorts of things have been happening that have been so wonderful. So how are things?
Let's do personal first. It's really interesting to think of where my kids are in their age right now, especially in the early days of writing my first book, because my kids were, I think they were when I started writing the book, I was in the thick of resentment in my own marriage because, the demand of parenthood when our kids are younger. And then as they start to grow older, I mean, we're still finessing the things in our marriage and how to be attuned to each other. And that's what I talk about in my first book, which is, even as a couples therapist, we get stuck. We have our communication patterns, and seeing our kids grow, it's incredible to watch their personalities evolve, those moments where they communicate a need and you think, yes, this is what we've been working towards, and they're doing it, or their independence and autonomy. that's just been incredible and beautiful. And one of the things that came out of my first book, I didn't sign up for this, was really the uptake from men. And I
Mm.
continue to get messages from men, dads, men in new relationships, people who don't have children. And there is this really special aha moment that has come from that book where they say, I'm reading these stories of other couples and I finally see myself and I finally see my partner. And just
Hmm.
to hear that impact of the first book, it's so meaningful. So that is where that one has landed. And I've then shifted to my second book, which has also been so well received in relationships. So it's been a busy 2 years.
No doubt. No doubt. And you're navigating the snow in the winter. I mean, this is great. I think I didn't sign up for this. Such a like a beautiful guide to support couples. And this second book, You, Your Husband, and His Mother. I mean, when I saw that come out, I was like, wow, this is something that I think impacts so many couples, so many wives, so many women are navigating this complex dynamic, and I don't think it's talked about a lot. So first of all, thank you for doing this work and supporting so many in this way. I would love to know what inspired the focus. I know in your practice you probably see this a lot, but what how did this new book come along?
Exactly with what you've just said is that
Mhm.
this is one of the top issues that couples struggle with, and yet we rarely name it. So it's really interesting. I started asking people, tell me about your relationship with your mother in law. And a lot of people would respond with, good, it's fine, good. And then when I asked a different question, over 82% of people responded saying yes. And the different question is, have you and your partner ever gotten into conflict because of your mother in law?
Ooh.
That is the question that I started asking because there is still this narrative that we shouldn't label, name, or share conflict that we're having with family. And because of that, what ends up happening is we sit in silence. When we're silenced and we feel alone in something, we think it must just be me. Why is this only happening to me? And perhaps maybe they're right. I am the problem. There is this whole spectrum that shows up around dealing with in-laws. And on one hand, people will say, I don't need your book. I have a good relationship with my mother-in-law. And I actually say, grab the book because then you can keep that strong relationship. It's inevitable that you're going to have changes in and seasons in your relationships. And then there's this other side of people who are saying, I have felt so stuck and lost and I don't know what to do next. So that's really where the book came from. And for listeners to know, this is the first book that has been written specifically for daughters in law. And yet, we know from research that when it comes to conflict in family, the highest rates of conflict are between daughter in law and mother in law. And I
Wow.
know we'll talk specifically more why that is. So the book really came from session after session, at least once a day, sitting with clients, at least once a day.
Wow.
And then my friends, my colleagues, the stories, the stuckness. I don't know what to do. My mother in law is doing this again. My husband is doing this. How do we navigate this? And then couples in my therapy room and in my coaching feeling stuck. How do we navigate this third person that is now inside our marriage? And the level of just not knowing how do we do this and how impactful it is on a marriage, that's where the book really came from.
Wow. I, as you said, we're speaking like just now, I could think of so many conversations I've had with some of my closest friends talking about issues that have come around and seemingly like this happened and then this happened and or people just dreading, the holidays are coming and I have to spend a lot of time with, that my in-laws. It can cause a lot of stress and it can be very, very challenging. So, why do you think the mother in law dynamics carry such emotional intensity, particularly for us women as daughter in laws?
Mm. We're looking at the relationship between two women, and we know the relational load tends to land on women. So
Mm-hmm.
here is a mother-in-law who has been the one to bring families together. And I think one of the biggest pieces around this, and I outline various reasons that are contributing to this in the first chapter of the book, but I think this really comes down to insecurity and to seeing something that is different than what they did.
Hmm.
So the insecurity is around, what's my role? And unfortunately, many people don't know how to have this conversation early on. What's my role? So I now see that my son has his own family. What role do I play here? And because we also know then, and it just tends to happen, not for everybody, but for many, is that women seek the comfort and support from their own mothers. And of course they do. That's familiar. They also know, they also have a history of practicing setting boundaries with their own mother. So they turn to that person who's comfortable, where they can feel like they can just be themselves. But with their mother-in-law, there's still been a power dynamic for many. And what I mean by that is, you enter into a family hoping to be liked. Of course, that's what women
Mm-hmm.
do. We want to be liked, we want to please, we want to care for others. And that works at the beginning. But then you start to create separation and individuation, not as a like a bad thing, but in a healthy way of saying, now that we're a family, now that we have one kid, two kid, now we're not going to do it your way. We're actually going to do it our way. And right
Mm-hmm.
there is the conflict, because your way looks different than how she did it. And so sometimes I wouldn't say I don't think it's jealousy. I think it's more insecurity, which maybe could have flavors of jealousy and envy mixed in there as well. But there is, and for some women, I do believe there is jealousy in there. But I think what happens is, here's this mother in law seeing you parent differently, dividing the load differently, showing up in the workplace in ways that she was never allowed to. And
Mm-hmm.
it can lead to either a, I don't know what my role is here, or even a, if you're doing it differently, does that mean that you think I did it bad?
Right.
And that as soon as there's that piece, and if we can't talk about it in safe, harmonious, respectful, mutual ways, then that just kind of creates these undertones in families.
Absolutely. So, what would you say are some misunderstandings that couples have, navigating the extended family relationships? Are there certain misunderstandings? You said like early on, these patterns can show up, or early on, you're sort of taking the place of this person, for that was such an important part of that dynamic. So, are there certain misunderstandings that we fall into often?
Mm. There's something around boundaries that if you express a boundary of no, please don't come over unannounced, it almost feels like a rejection to the mother-in-law, when it's not. It's just simply a, this is what I want. And so then oftentimes these boundaries or desires and wishes as this new forming family, they start to feel personal to other extended family members. And we can have this conversation whether it's a father-in-law, mother-in-law, or your own mother. A lot of people, when the book came out, were asking, can I read this for my own mom? Or can I read this about my sister-in-law? And the answer is yes, because the system in there is really designed to help you create a solid marriage. That's what this is about,
Mm-hmm.
so that the third person can't come in and interrupt your marriage. So that's one misunderstanding that I commonly show up. Another misunderstanding is where needs and desires are coming from. And this is a big one. So let's say your husband then goes to his mom and says, Mom, this holiday, we're not coming for December 25th, or Easter's coming up, whatever celebration is near, okay? We're not
Mm-hmm.
coming. And I know that's different than what you want. We're going to do it this way this year. But we'd love to figure out something where we can get together at a different time.
Right.
So then what his mom hears is, so your wife doesn't want to be with me or with us. Your wife is causing you to do this different. Your boundary is coming from the wife
Mm-hmm.
instead of a mom seeing them as a family unit. So one of the biggest misunderstandings is that daughters-in-law end up being scapegoated and
Mm-hmm.
blamed for the problems in a family. And yet, and I outline this in the book, what is so important to recognize is that You, as a daughter in law, joined a family system. That system was in place long before you joined the family.
Sure.
And now, as kind of this quote unquote, I'm using my hands, quote unquote, outsider, you see a pattern and you can name it. And so then you say to your husband, "Oh, your mom's guilt tripping us. Did you know she's doing it? Oh no, no, don't be ridiculous. She's not guilt tripping. That's just how she is." So then over time you say, "Well, actually, I would like to not be there for that holiday day and for us to create our own, not to exclude your mom, but for us to start our own tradition. Like that's important to me as a family." And then it's confusing though, because who's really setting the boundary? Who's setting that desire? And what ends up happening then is this is where daughters-in-law get labeled as the bad one.
Yeah. So this is so interesting, and I can see how that can happen really quickly, can happen often, and especially at those really, I would say, emotionally charged times. You're talking about holidays, you're talking about visiting, you're talking about when you might have a baby. These times especially, but just even on a weekly, daily basis. You say there are 6 types of mothers-in-law and then 3 styles of daughter-in-law. So, what are some of the characteristics and traits for each of these? I think it would be important to label this early on. We can try to think of our own roles and what might be happening in our dynamics. Why is it
Mm-hmm.
important to understand this? And as a daughter in law, like, can we shift into a different style? Let's talk about this a little bit.
I want to zoom out from that first, because this is not meant to blame, shame, or diagnose people.
Of
What
course,
is
sure.
more important about this is to understand a pattern of behavior. And we all have patterns of behavior. And
Hmm.
when we can understand that about ourselves and about other people, we can then decide and reflect what's going on for me, what do I need, and also what's going to be best working for them and for who they are. Okay, I have 1,000 thoughts at once that I want to go through. Okay, let's start with the daughters-in-law styles. And I labeled them style because what I often see is how women almost transition through them at various times in their relationship with mother-in-law. And so we have the good girl mother-in-law, or good girl daughter-in-law rather, and the good girl daughter-in-law pleases, she wants the approval. She's the one
Hmm.
who says, "Valentine's Day is coming up. I'm going to get the card for your mom and send it to her." She goes over and above. It's likely a role she plays in lots of places. Then
Hmm.
we have, so again, if we think of a continuum, then we have the manager. And the manager is someone, gosh, we need our managers in our life. They have a high appreciation for how control plays a role in their life. They know what works for their family. They need things to be just specifically so. I describe one person in the book who had a really hard time shifting out of nap times anytime her mother-in-law was over. She really managed her household. And then when we swing a little bit differently, then we have the collaborator. The collaborator can see when she can see her values. She can see what's important to her. She can express and assert her boundaries. She can also be flexible when needed, depending on the situation. So, even the collaborator, I think what's important is she has to practice expressing her needs to others and knowing what they are first beforehand and not being just a go with the flow kind of person. So, then when I think about the types of mothers in law, I intentionally stayed away from the word narcissist. And I did
Okay.
this because it is such a harmful label that when you go into that category and you go to your husband and say, "Your mother is such a narcissist," we've lost all nuance and context. We've broken connection because for many men, they don't see their mothers that way. And that's not a label that's going to help build what you're trying to do here. Ultimately, we're trying to build a strong marriage so that we can also then coexist alongside family in ways that
Hmm.
keep your marriage strong. That's the most important piece. Okay, so we'll go through the 6 types. I've put them into 3 different categories. The first category are the internalizers. And the internalizers take the world as everything happening to them. So we have the martyr, who cares and gives endlessly, but there's guilt attached. We
Hmm.
have the victim, who isn't so much focused on the guilt attached to her caring, but it's more of everything is happening to her. Then we have the externalizers, and the externalizers are people who focus outward. It's like I push everything to everybody else. Everyone else is the problem. So we have the blamer, who scapegoats the daughter-in-law and will say things like, we never had these problems in our family before you joined. And we have the controller. And the controller will tell you exactly how things are going to go, tells you what dish exactly to bring to the family gathering, what time you should be there, and there's no deviation. I think of the controller as the mother-in-law who walks in and says immediately, you don't have socks on the baby. You have to put socks on the baby. Let me go get those socks. Baby must have socks. And it's funny for the so many podcasts I've appeared on. Whenever I bring up socks on baby, we all just kind of chuckle in this, like,
It's
oh yes,
hilarious. Yeah.
okay, we know this thing. And so it. No, hang on. I'm going to save that thought for one more second. So let me finish the two other types. These are more of the balancers who can do the internalization and externalization, and that's the distancer. This is the mother-in-law who you send the invite out, but it feels so confusing because she doesn't want to join you. She maybe lives 20 minutes down the street, but you see her twice a year. She's more avoidant and not involved in the family. And that might have worked before you had kids, but now that you have children, you wish to have the village and to have someone involved. And then you have the supporter. And I remember one client saying, I've just hit the jackpot with my mother-in-law. She shows up. She doesn't get in the middle of our marriage. She respects both of us. She says, I trust you guys to work this out. I'm not getting involved. She's just there to provide that respect, mutuality, and care without strings attached. And when I think about the types, I know many people will say, oh, I can see both of these in my mother-in-law, or oh, I can see flavors of all of it. And again, the reason why the types are there is so that you then can look at how can I communicate with this person? So for example, with the controller, it can be so easy to start to argue with the controller. So then you start to say, well, actually, research shows that socks on baby. And then you get stuck in this who's right cycle, which doesn't move you forward. So if you have this
Mm-hmm.
understanding that every time your mother-in-law comes over and she's going to comment on how you run the household, how you run the kids, how et cetera, you just change the topic. You let all of that deflect off of you. You now have the agency within yourself to not have to argue with her and to know this is not me, this is her stuff.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, as you were going through both the styles of daughter-in-law, I could see myself, time here, there, and all of those three categories. And then for the mothers-in-law, I can see places where I've had friends, mothers-in-law, my own mother-in-law, my mom, who is a mother-in-law. I have three brothers. So it's really interesting. And I think really important to be able to understand that those different there's a lot of nuance there and to understand that
100%.
differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
In researching for our conversation, I was reminded about a book that I read by Gay Hendricks. And I don't remember the name of it, but it was based on Stephen Cartman's model of dysfunctional conflict dynamics in relationships. And it was sort of that drama triangle talking about the roles that we slip into. This was more for like a spousal partnership, but being like the victim or the villain or trying to be the hero, and how we can slip into these roles that keep conflict alive instead of resolving issues, instead of repairing. And in your book, you kind of talk about the victim versus villain and this dynamic that you see in mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationships. Why is this so common? You kind of touched upon it when you're talking about these different types of mothers-in-law, but how does this victim versus villain come into play?
Throughout my clinical work, I continued to see this kind of binary experience that women were having. The victim was feeling like everything was happening to them. So a daughter-in-law
Mm-hmm.
would feel like my mother-in-law tells me what to do and I don't have a choice. And then she comes into my home and makes this comment and I feel all this guilt and I don't have any agency. And so that's where that victim position came from. And then that was contrasted sharply with the villain, the person who had boundaries, the daughter-in-law who said no, or who said it's not okay for you to make those comments. And so I just found that women were almost getting stuck in one or the other. And so the way I framed the book is you having a seat at the table in this
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. You're not going to get stuck in it. You're not going to feel helpless. You're also not coming at it from this place of aggression and being the bad one. Like no one wants to be the bad one in the family. So how do you then get a seat at the table? And let's just talk about that triangulation piece there for a moment, because that drama triangle is actually one of the toxic family dynamics I highlight in chapter 2. So in the book, the first part, I do the insight piece, which is what's the family you married into, what's your own baggage that you bring into this, and then what's the relational stuff in there. And then part
Mm-hmm.
two is really the system for you and your partner to get on the same team. Like it's action packed. I had one person describe it like, I'm not even having issues with my in-laws, but we're taking this as a marriage minute, and I'm going to go through all these exercises so we can feel more like a team, which was fantastic. So that triangulation piece is where, and so there's three positions, and there's the victim position where it could be the mother-in-law. So this is kind of a different conceptualization of the victim villain, but this is where mother-in-law is the victim, and then she might pull her son into being the rescuer and hero, and then
Mm-hmm.
someone's the persecutor. So if you think about even your own family or your husband's family, without you in it, who's the persecutor? And that's the person who's like the bad one. So sometimes a mother in so I'll just say a person, but a mother-in-law, she'll pull in her son to be the hero and the rescuer, and the persecutor is the dad.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's a sister who plays the victim and then pulls in brother to be the rescuer and mom's the bad one. Or even with the mother in law, daughter in law triangle, then making the daughter in law out to be the persecutor when maybe even she's not. And I think, even for context, for daughters in law who are listening to this, and for mothers in law to hear this, but I want daughters in law to really walk away from this book knowing that you are not the sole cause of what's happened in your family. And I sit across from women every day and I say to them, you are not crazy. You are not the only one experiencing this. And you did not cause all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's this almost dichotomy or binary around this conversation where daughters in law are rightfully hurt. They come into a marriage hoping to have a family. I have sat across
Mm-hmm.
from zero women who said, I found my husband, but had planned right away to excommunicate his family. No
Right.
one has said that to me. And then I hear from mothers in law where they say, we never had these issues before she joined our family.
Mm-hmm.
And then they make the daughter-in-law out to be the sole problem when it is actually everybody's responsibility in there to create an environment of respect. It has to start with the parent.
So, I mean, it's interesting how you're talking about how tension's moving through three people, right,
Mhm.
in this triangle, instead of being addressed directly. But
Yes.
how do we recognize when we're caught in a triangle? Like you were kind of
Oh, I love
naming some
that.
different options, and I was thinking, like, okay, I can see that, I can understand that. How
Yeah.
do we recognize if we're sort of caught in one of these triangles that we should be aware of?
And recognizing the triangle is step 3 in the system. So that's what vault is, an acronym. The U stands for understanding your triangle. And
Okay.
I intentionally put this as step 3 so that your partner is going to be on board and open and connected with you to do that. And it also addresses this piece where a lot of people were saying to me, my husband's putting me in the middle, or my wife's putting me in the middle. And it's this awareness to understand, okay, wait, no, there's no middle. This is the triangle.
Mm-hmm.
So when two people can't resolve conflict, or there's stress, or the dynamic is feeling difficult between two people, we bring in a third to help alleviate that feeling. And that's problematic. And we see it in families. We see it between brother, sister. They bring in mom. We see it
Mm-hmm.
in friends. We see it in coworkers. This is what people do, and it is one of the hardest things. Now, the challenging piece with the mother-in-law daughter-in-law dynamic specifically is if you as a daughter-in-law have a mother-in-law who has repeatedly said that you are the problem and does not respect you, this communication has to come from your husband,
Okay.
because he, and I say this often to people, if there's tension in relationships, it's your job to go to your parents. So adult child goes to parent. So he would go to his. And you don't, and this is the mistake that I see many men doing and many people in general, but many men will go to their moms and say, Andryanna doesn't want to be here for Christmas. She's
Yeah.
still breastfeeding. So we're not going to, please don't come over. That's what she
Yeah.
wants. And
Hmm.
right there, that's the triangle.
Hmm.
That's creating a triangle that you're the one wanting these things and it's not a we in our marriage. And the most
Hmm.
powerful thing is for him to go to his mom and say, listen, mom, we're good. We're trying to figure this out. This is the season we are in, and I want you too.
Yeah. Wow. So true. I do want to talk about the vault
Hmm.
process that you've developed. Before we talk about that, I do want to talk about the mother son dynamic just a tiny little bit
Oh,
because
yeah.
I've got three boys. I'm
Ooh.
pretty curious, and I have three younger brothers. I want to make sure that I'm trying my best here, and I want
Yeah.
to raise children, raise my boys who are going to be amazing partners one day. What are some of those unhealthy dynamics that can form between the mom and the son?
Hmm.
And then from there, like, what does healthy differentiation between a mother and son look like as the sons begin to grow and become adults,
Yeah.
and how can we nurture closeness with them, because my boys are little, but I still I can't imagine having a strained relationship with them as they grow into adulthood. But we don't want to create enmeshment, we don't want to create dependency. Like, what are some of these unhealthy dynamics, and how can we foster a closeness without, turning into the crazy mother-in-law one day?
I want to show up wholeheartedly here because I have a son and I have a
Mm-hmm.
daughter. And
Mm-hmm.
so I am experiencing both ways of parenting right now. And of course, you parent based on your child and who they are. And I think the question is developmentally, do I meet them where they're at? And maybe I'll answer this question with a story and experience I had. I'll share two of them. The first one I'm reminded of is I was sitting in a coffee shop and I was sitting beside two women. They were friends. They were out connecting. I don't know how old they were, but I caught wind that the one son, her son is 25. And then she says, he's dating an older woman. She's a few years older. And he came to me talking about marriage. And I just know that she's pressuring him because she's older. And
Mm.
so, right there, one of the unhealthy things that we do is we intensely mother our children. And I think we more intensely mother our sons instead of allowing them to grow. And what I mean by that is growth is to individuate and to separate.
Right.
So we are constantly watching our children do this. At 8 months old, at 4 weeks old, they realize they're separate from us. Their eyes adjust and change. They realize that they're a separate entity from us. At 8 months old, they start pushing mom away. So you put baby on the floor. At 2 months or 2 years, they yell, no, I don't want to do that, right? So all of this is autonomy building. And when I say meeting them developmentally, when they're two, you're there setting healthy boundaries. You're there guiding them. You're there helping to instill values and to meet them there. But when they're 25 and you're thinking that someone else is pressuring them and that's the belief you're holding, that's concerning because your son is now a 25-year-old who can make their own choices. And I think the
Right.
healthy place in here is how do I continue to help my child make their own choices, tune into themselves and what they want and need? And it might not be what
Right.
I want and need. That's the difference, right? Here's an example. My son comes to me recently and he was like, Mom, my friends are outside. I know we were supposed to hang out together and have our one on one time. Can I go play with my friends? And I immediately said,
Mm.
Absolutely. Yes, go hang out with your friends. But hey, let's schedule our one on one time at another time that works. There's a few things that happen here. One, I learn that he trusts me to come to me. He learns that I'm a safe person to come and I'm not going to guilt him. It doesn't mean I
Mm-hmm.
say, sure, always cancel your plans with me. That's fine. That's not what that is. This is more of I'm meeting you with what you need right now. And a 10-year-old boy needs to hang out with his friends. So let's also
Mm-hmm.
talk about our
Especially
values. And
outside.
Oh my goodness. Anytime they come to me, I mean, that's kind of my weakness, right? It's like, you want to go outside? Friends are there. Go for it. We'll schedule
Yeah.
another time.
Done.
But then we
Yeah.
do, right? Like we still schedule that other time
Right.
because that's part of our values of spending time together as a family. But it's not the control. It's not all
Hmm.
my timeline. It's not felt with guilt of, okay, well, I guess I'll just stay home and do nothing
Oh,
and
fine. Yeah.
I'll may
Poor
I guess
mom.
I'll get out my watercolor paints, right? Like no. So
Right.
what's really, I think the question was like, what's the toxic part? Me as mom, I put my feelings on him. I make him feel
Hmm.
guilty for wanting his own identity or that I struggle with my own identity. I don't meet him developmentally where he's at. And I know this is going to happen more in the teenage years. Um, I loved even, this was another example. I know we're around Valentine's Day, so I've really been thinking about this memory where last year it was so annoying. I put up these like heart things over their doors, and I just felt like this really fun mom of like, you're going to wake up to hearts, and every time you go into your room, you'll spread the little heart thing on the door. Yeah, okay. So after I put it up, he then comes to me and says, Mom, take it down. Like, I cannot keep going into my room like this. It's irritating me. And so part of me was like super crushed inside, obviously. And then the other part was, and what I said to him was, I'm so glad you told me that that
Sure.
doesn't work for you. I'll take it
Hmm.
down. And I did.
Hmm.
And there was nothing attached to our lovability, to our connection, to him and his goodness. That's healthy. And so when I think about what it means to raise our boys, how do we keep allowing them to build their own sense of self and their own autonomy? And I'll say this intentionally as a mom of a boy and a girl, is that I think we mother our sons differently than girls. We want our girls to be independent. And so we say, never rely on someone, go and, be strong and be brave. And then I think for boys, sometimes we miss that and we need to make sure we're doing both for both.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I can see that. I can also see my husband is the youngest of three. He has two older sisters, and how they always still grill him like, "Oh, your mommy's such a mommy's boy, such a mommy's boy." And so there's some dynamics at play there too. But I appreciate how we can maintain a closeness without having to fall into being the victim, being poor me, and maintaining that autonomy moving forward. And now we've touched on the vault, and it sounds pretty serious, it sounds pretty intense, but your book, it's divided into two parts. And so
Yeah.
like you said, like the first part is looking at those common patterns, the toxic familiar patterns that maybe relationship pitfalls, and how can we become more aware, and all the insights associated with that. And then the second part is really pragmatic, because it helps us to learn and combat these things with this vault method. So I do want to touch upon it a little bit. Of course, we're going to read the book and to really dive deeper. But the vault is an acronym. It stands V is for values, A, aspirations, U, understanding your triangle, like you mentioned, L, limits and boundaries, and then the T is taking action. I do want to start with the V, and I want to talk a little bit more about the values part, because it sounds really simple in a way, but also when I think about just like what are your values, it can seem so abstract as well,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're thinking about it for yourself and your spouse and your family unit. So how do you define values, and how can we, with our partner, uncover and put words, put meaning, and articulate our shared values in a way that is practical and it's going to support us in our lives and meaningful? Like, do you have any examples, or how can we better
Mm-hmm.
understand this V part?
Mm. Before I answer that, I want to just provide listeners with an understanding of where vault came from. And it really was this image that I used. I mean, I kind of think of Taylor Swift's vault tracks that she takes out, right? Like it's like this vault of all of your like good, strong marital stuff, that it's a solid structure around the two of you so that it's not having someone else sleeping in your bed, right? It's not having a mother-in-law or a friend or a sister-in-law who is inserting them inside your marriage. When you
Mm-hmm.
can have this strong vault, you will feel steady and like a solid team. So that's really where that started to come from, was that imagery of how do we support couples? Because it's not about cutting out families. It's not about this all or nothing thing. It's not about being victim and villain. It's this, we want couples to feel strong. So the values piece, it's really interesting because when I sit in front of clients, many people will say, I don't know what you mean by values. You're asking this kind of concept and I don't understand it. And because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times our world is directed by goals. We know what our goals
Right.
are. I'm going to work out 3 times a week. That's a goal. Well, why do you have that goal? What's that connected to? And so the bigger question then is, what matters to you? What is important to you? So presumably someone who says I work out 3 times a week, their value would be physical health, or their
Mm-hmm.
value would be overall wellness or mental wellness. And that's where the goal comes from. And I think a lot of times what ends up happening for couples is we act on autopilot or this kind of rote memory of what we should be doing. And so the shoulds are, you should be with your family every holiday. You should have Sunday patisseries with mom every Sunday, or whatever that looks like. Um, and I believe that a lot of people today in this generation are saying, here's our value, but it doesn't make us morally good or bad if we don't live it out in the same way our parents did.
Mm.
And when I think of that example, I think of previous generations who would pack up their kids, 3 kids in the car, dogs in the trunk with the gifts, and you're driving 6 hours in the snowstorm, even further north to Timmins, right?
Yeah.
Like that's our parents' generations will say that's just what you did because you always landed at grandmama's house on December
Sure.
25th for 2 p.m. dinner. And today's couples are saying, we don't want to do that. Yes, we
Mm-hmm.
value family, but we also value our own unit and what's going to bring us joy and spark connection and even spark rest because, the world
Mm-hmm.
is exhausting and the information overload that we all experience every day. So, this is an exercise to help you and your partner first identify what's really important to you. There's a list of 100 words. You group the words together with what matters most important to you. You might take 20 of those words, you might highlight 50 of them, and then you group them. You each do the exercise and you come together as a couple, and then you decide and you talk about what matters, what is really important. Because sometimes what happens is we do just act on autopilot and we don't know why we're doing the things. And
Mm-hmm.
this is actually the step that involves talking about your mother in law the least. But then in step 2, what I noticed was happening with couples is they would both come to me saying, well, of course we value family, but we can't
Mm-hmm.
get on the same page about how often we see family. So step 2
Mm-hmm.
helps you go from 35,000 feet in the air down to ground level. There's a long list of questions that even I wish I had before we had kids or before we got married, just to work out these kinks. There's a list of questions in there so that you two can have these conversations earlier to support you in actually living out your values.
I appreciate that. And to your point, even if you're not experiencing any challenges with your in-laws or with that family dynamic, what a beautiful thing to be able to early in your relationship, map this out regardless of what's going on in your life, like to be able to drive your life together as a couple moving forward. And this might take us into the aspirations, but how can then our values act as a compass when we are navigating the challenging moments, when there are conflicts
Mm.
with that extended family? What do our values do to support us in navigating that?
That really comes down to decision making. So oftentimes we get stuck in loops, and the loops of we should, I must, others are expecting us. I'm a good son if I do XYZ. And
Mm-hmm.
the question then couples can come back to is what's important to us right now? And this is also about psychological flexibility because what matters to you when your kids are 2 and 4 is going to be different to you than what mattered to you when you didn't have kids or what matters to you when your kids are 8 and 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is such a beautiful place to come from, is to say, we don't have to be rigid. We don't have to be the same every single year. Things are going to be different. And one year, if your partner's in a job transition and stresses are high, traveling those 6 hours might not be on your bingo card. And so you say the
Mm-hmm.
most important thing to us right now is actually looking after our health and staying grounded. And so then you use the strategies in step 4 and step 5 to help communicate that to family members and get ahead of those things so that you are then acting from a place of your values and not acting from the pressures, the guilt, the demands, the control and rigidity that show up in some of those unhealthy family systems.
So intentional. I love that. We did touch upon understanding your triangle, the U. I do, again, the word boundary, like, it's overused, but and it's everywhere right now. I think very misunderstood when we talk about
Mm.
boundaries. Can you help us before we get into it in your book? Like, how do you
Yeah.
define boundary and how's it
Mm.
different from just say a request or just like, oh, can you do this? Like talk to
Oh,
us about boundaries like in a real life way.
there's a piece in chapter 3 that I talk about expectations as well, because that's a definite part of this conversation. Boundaries, so many people come to me saying I'm setting boundaries and they're not respecting it. And it's really fascinating, actually, as a sidebar, to note that many people who say they're not respecting my boundaries, they go to this black or white thinking, all or nothing. And we really want to find this gray area. So this book is really about helping you stay in contact and creating relationships that work for you, because there are reasons why
Mm-hmm.
we stay in contact with families. And this is
Mm-hmm.
not, we're not talking about a history of physical abuse, like in from family.
Mm-hmm.
That's completely different. Um, but oftentimes, what's ending up happening in this conversation around boundaries is people are making requests. And that's, I'm asking you to do something. A boundary is what I am or am not willing to do, and it asks nothing of the other person. It is then followed up with an action. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
communicate something and then you need to take action. So I remember one client we talked about, every time her mom would start kind of pulling her into therapist mode on the phone, then she would say, "Okay, mom, it's time to go now. I'll talk to you next week at our regular time. I love you. Bye." And she would hang up the phone because her boundary is, I am not going to play therapist with you.
Mm-hmm.
And previously, she'd get into these arguments. Mom, just did you reach out to those? Here, I'll give you another list of therapists that you can reach out. Mom, you're struggling. Have you tried this? Have you done that? And she would just loop and then say, my mother's not respecting my boundaries. I don't want to play mini therapist to her anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And pulling back, it was the request that she kept making instead of the action to follow through with her
Right.
boundary. That was the most important thing. So, the other piece that I noticed that was really missing in how we talked about boundaries is the couple dynamic. How do we do this together? And
Right.
so I really found that there are these 3 elements that all three have to be there to enable a couple to move forward. And maybe you do this on your own and that's okay. Maybe your partner's on board. The first one is the willingness. Is your
Mm-hmm.
partner willing to actually set boundaries? And in order to be willing, you have to have importance. Does your partner understand why this is important? Do you even know why it's important? And I help people understand what their core needs are around this, because it's one thing to say a boundary of saying, I don't want your mother to come over every Sunday. It's completely different to say, I need to feel safe, like we're on the same team when your mother is
Mm-hmm.
here. So
Right.
I help people find that part with themselves. The third element of setting a boundary is the ability. That is actually, how do you do this in words, in action? And I give a whole group of examples. But those 3 pieces, I haven't seen any boundary book talk about this, of how do you actually do this together as a couple?
Mm-hmm. Which can be the most important part. So then, obviously we're talking about taking action. That is the T in the vault. You're putting what you've learned collectively into practice, and then you're moving forward to create the relationship that you want to have with your extended family, with your mother-in-law, with the people that you've had maybe strained relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
And you really emphasize shifting from the you versus me into the we. And you gave such great examples like, oh, like, the wife doesn't want to do this because of this reason. And I think we can all relate to that in some way, shape, or form. So, what are some realistic ways that couples can strengthen this alignment, I guess, is going through the vault method perhaps, but how can we do that before we're addressing the conflict?
I was going to go in a different direction with that question. How do we do that before we're addressing the conflict? The you versus so we want to shift into a we position, which means that if one person is struggling with something, then it's not a her issue, it's a couple issue.
Right.
This is about you being together in something. And I think when I say that, I want people to understand that just because you don't want to do something doesn't mean your partner meets you there. That's not a relationship. A relationship is about co creation and negotiation and compromise. There's a
Mm-hmm.
both and in there. And so you both have to come together in this to find your areas of flexibility. And I walk people through compromise within that, within the book as well. Where I wanted to go with this is actually talking about anticipation. And I do that in step 5. It's part of my 3 A's: anticipate, act, adjust. Because I think so many people enter into these family experiences or events or conversations hoping for something to be different. And then they leave the experience and they're frustrated. And it's the
Right.
same thing over and over again. Wash, rinse, repeat. How could she
Mm-hmm.
do this again? She's always commenting on my parenting, right? That's exhausting on our own experience. And
Mm-hmm.
we lose our sense of agency in that. And this
Mm-hmm.
whole work here is really about you finding your voice and having agency. So I tell people, yes, I believe that people change. And I also know that families tend to be predictable and consistent. If your mother in law is known to comment on your parenting, she's likely going to do it again. So
Mm-hmm.
you and your partner can get together and say, hey, this doesn't feel good. What could we do moving forward? And I walk you through various questions and steps within that to help identify what's really important for the two of you to address. But spending time before a family event, before the experience, really allows you to be on the same page. And when we can slow down and do that work, the benefit of that is you feeling more like a team, feeling like the we.
Mm-hmm. As we close out, I mean, this book is such an incredible resource for couples. As a first step, perhaps you are a daughter-in-law. You want to make some change. You want to go from a you versus me into a we. Um, to have a discussion with your partner to broach the subject, to help them understand how you're feeling, why you would like to see change. I often see, especially with women, they're reading the self-help books, they're talking to their friends, they're going out to do the work to try to make significant change, or to try to better understand the situations that they're in. How do we better get our partners on board to get into that we framework in order to be able to
Mm.
go through this process and take action?
The short response is to say, stop focusing on changing your mother in law and start
Mm-hmm.
focusing on feeling like a solid team. And so then, because here's what we need to realize: anytime we go to our partners and say, your mom always does this, your mom that, you are naturally inviting your partner to show up with defensiveness. It's normal for all of us to defend our parents, even if they haven't done great things, even if they've been hurtful. And so instead, I say to people, go to your partner and focus on, how can we feel good together? How can we feel aligned and like our nervous systems are not on fire and we can stay connected through this? And that might
Mm-hmm.
even be about you thinking a bit more about, what is it that you need in these visits? Is it, I remember one client, we agreed that, and she was able to get her husband on board with this, that he wouldn't leave the room. He wouldn't leave her alone with mother-in-law, because his mother would say nasty comments to her every time she was by herself.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the value was to be there. Her husband wanted the contact with family still, and they had a
Mm-hmm.
child they were bringing. And so they made that agreement. Okay, I won't go anywhere. Or maybe it's a squeeze of the leg or a look across the room that signals, I got you. We're in this together.
Mm-hmm.
Or afterwards, you being able to say, we did a good job. We got through that together. And again, all of that is the we part that we can do now, even before starting these bigger conversations.
So true. So true. And then on the flip side, because many of us listening will one day become mothers in law. And I mean, I just like this, the last 2 years have flown by. I can't imagine, since the last time we talked, what we'll be chatting about next. But what can we do right now to foster healthier generational relationship patterns?
Oh my goodness. This question is probably the second top question I get. One is, how do I deal with my mother-in-law? Two, how do I not repeat these patterns? And I
Sure.
often say to daughters-in-law, you already showing up and asking this question shows an awareness that I sometimes think our mothers-in-law didn't have, because
Right.
we are a generation saying we don't just accept this kind of treatment versus 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, women just accepted that this is how they were treated. So I think that is a difference already. But the other piece here is that your child will always be their own selves. And your job then is to be curious about who they are and to not confront it with judgment, but to be supportive and respectful. And that whoever they bring in, you can find one thing that you like about them. You can do that with everybody.
Mm,
And
yeah.
that is an active choice of kindness and compassion, because you see the greater picture. And the greater picture is to be part of something outside of yourself, which is your children's lives. And the more, and I think we have to remember this, the more we try to control and manage and navigate, that creates greater friction and distance in families. But if you can surrender and say, you know what, I can hold two truths. I don't have to like everything about this
Hmm.
person, and I can still treat them the way I would want them to treat me, and I can still welcome them into my family as a person. And see also too that when my child does something, it's not because of an outsider. My child participates in that. And I think that's just a powerful shift where we're going to be different in this next generation. And because everyone's going to
Oh,
grab my book.
yeah. Well, like you had me in tears there for a second, but like, yeah,
Oh,
can we
Andryanna.
find one nice thing? And I think that's such a lesson in like across the board, not just as we move into the mother-in-law role, but like everywhere in life. Can we find one nice
I
thing about someone?
I think about what it means to just be a wholehearted, authentic person, and to be outside of ourselves, because I think it's easy to get stuck in our own stories and beliefs and to
Hmm.
paint somebody with a certain brushstroke. And even for mothers-in-law, if you're a mother-in-law right now, focus on that thing that is positive about your family and grow that, water that part, not the negatives. Because there are some amazing people out there, and you can find that in someone else. And that's powerful.
So
It's like this
powerful.
whole, like, how do I get to choose to show up in the world? I can continue to say, oh, I don't like my daughter in law. She's controlling. She does this, does that. Okay. Or you reframe that and say, how whatever it is this person in this world is doing this, and I can admire this part about them. And that's really
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah, so powerful. So powerful. Dr. Tracy, I'm so grateful we had this conversation. You,
Me
your husband,
too.
and his mother create a healthy relationship with your mother in law and your spouse in 5 simple steps. It's out wherever books are sold. You can buy it online, in store. Definitely go pick up a copy. What's on tap for you now? I mean, you've had this incredible, like, it was such a well received book because the topic is so, so needed. I've seen such powerful praise for this book, Dr. Shafali, all these people, you name it.
Oh yeah, it's
What
been,
is what's what? How are you receiving this? And is there anything planned in the horizon?
oh my goodness. Bringing a book into the world is such a beautiful opportunity. It's such a gift to be able to know that I'm reaching more people outside of my therapy room, because
Mm-hmm.
that really is what this work is. How can I reach one more person? And so if you've listened today, I would be so grateful to just bring this to your group chat and share the episode with someone you love and tell them about the book, because that opens the conversation, and then more people can start saying, "Oh, I'm not alone in this." And we're not having this conversation to burn down the doors of an in-law or family member. We're having it to have healthier, more compassionate and smooth relationships. So for me, my goodness, I'm dabbling in some more writing, and I'm still
Oh, yay!
podcasting. My husband has joined more episodes on our podcast. So we are continuing to share more about those tough moments in our own marriage and how, people can keep strengthening their own relationships. So people can join me over there as well. But I'm grateful for our conversation today and for our connection.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, dear Dr. Tracy, it's always fun when Greg shows up. You always know
I
you're in
know.
for a good chat, right? Well, thank you so much for your time. Good luck with all the snow. All the
Thank you.
best to your kids and your family. And I look forward to chatting again soon.
Me too. Thank you.
Wow, what a thoughtful, practical, and compassionate conversation that was. I'm so grateful to Tracy and for her time, her honesty, and for just that willingness to share with so many. And I know we are all taking away so much from this conversation. And as we continue to explore relationships, I think this conversation highlights something really important. And that is healthy relationships aren't built on perfection or avoidance. They're built on things like awareness and communication and shared values and intentional boundaries. And, whether you're listening and you're navigating these dynamics right now, or you're thinking ahead to the relationships that you're shaping for the future, these are some amazing tools that you can begin to apply right here and right now. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to connect with Tracy and explore her new book. All of the links and resources are included in the show notes. And as always, if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who could benefit. Give it to a friend, send that link, put it in your social media, tag me on your Instagram stories, leave a rating or review, send me a message. There is an email address in the notes for this show. I would love to hear from you. I would love to know what is landing with you. Thank you so much for being here, and I cannot wait to see you on the next episode of The Juggle is Real. Take good care.